The coffee mug slipped out of Cecilia Banks's fingers and hit the break room tile with a crack so loud that two people turned around, but Cecilia never looked down. Her eyes were locked on the small silver frame sitting on the corner of a stranger's desk, angled just enough for anyone walking past to see it. In that frame was her husband, sunburned shoulders, a crooked grin, his arm wrapped around the waist of a woman whose face was turned toward the camera, with the kind of comfort that doesn't come from a business trip. Cecilia had been on the job for exactly 4 hours and 7 minutes. Before this story goes any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you do not want to miss how this one ends. Cecilia Banks did not raise her voice. She did not flinch. She bent down, picked up the broken pieces of the mug, apologized for the mess, and smiled at the woman whose desk it was. That smile would end up being the most expensive thing Cecilia ever gave away for free, because it bought her time, and time was exactly what she needed. 3 weeks before that morning, Cecilia had been sitting in her car outside a glass office building in Midtown, Atlanta, gripping the steering wheel and telling herself she deserved this. She was 34 years old, and for the last 6 years, she had built campaigns from a home office while her husband Israel ran his construction and development company 2 floors below their condo's parking garage. She had been good at her job, too good to stay invisible. When Solstice Media Group offered her a senior account director position with a salary that nearly doubled what she'd been making freelance, she didn't think twice. She told Israel that night over dinner, expecting him to be thrilled. He wasn't. "You don't need to do this, baby," Israel had said, twirling his fork through a plate of jerked chicken and rice he barely touched. "We're good. The business is good. Why go sit in some office building with people you don't know?" "Because I want to, Israel," Cecilia said, laughing a little. Because surely he was joking. "I've been working from this dining room table for 6 years. I want a team. I want an office with a door that closes." "An office with a door that closes," Israel repeated, like the words tasted strange in his mouth. He set his fork down. "Just feels sudden, that's all." "It's not sudden. I've been talking about this for months." "To who?" "To you, Israel. I literally told you about the Solstice opportunity in March." He shrugged like that detail didn't matter, took a sip of his drink, and changed the subject to a permit issue at one of his job sites. Cecilia let it go. Looking back now, she would replay that conversation more times than she could count, turning it over like a stone in her palm, looking for the crack she missed. The morning of her first day, Israel kissed her on the forehead before she left, told her she was going to knock their socks off, and went back to scrolling his phone at the kitchen island. Cecilia drove to Solstice, with her hand steady on the wheel and her stomach doing slow, nervous flips. She'd worked in offices before years ago, but never one this size. Solstice occupied 3 floors of a building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a lobby that smelled like eucalyptus and ambition. Her new boss, a sharp-suited man named Terrence Whitfield, met her at the elevator with a firm handshake and a wide-practiced smile. "Cecilia Banks, we are thrilled to have you. Your reel on the Brightline campaign sold the whole team." "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. I'm excited to be here." "Terrence, please, let's get you settled. Then I want to walk you through the accounts you'll be inheriting. We've got a few big ones, and one in particular I think you're going to love, given your background." He led her down a hallway lined with framed campaign posters, past a kitchen where someone was loudly defending their choice of oat milk, and into a corner office that was in fact hers. Cecilia tried not to let her face show how much that simple fact moved her. A door, a nameplate with her name on it, a window that looked out over the Atlanta skyline. She set her bag down on the desk and ran her hand along the edge of it the way you might touch something you weren't sure was really yours yet. "Settle in for a bit," Terrence said. "At 10, I'll have Gabriella Cross come grab you. She's our lead on one of our biggest development accounts. And since you've got construction industry experience from your freelance days, I think you two are going to mesh well. Banks Builders has been a client of ours for about a year now, and frankly, we could use someone with your eye on that account." Cecilia's stomach did a small, strange flip at the name Banks Builders, but she told herself it was nothing. Banks was a common enough name. Israel's company was Banks Construction Group, not Banks Builders, and Atlanta was full of contractors. She nodded, smiled, and said that sounded great. At 10 o'clock sharp, a woman appeared in Cecilia's doorway wearing a cream blazer so crisp it looked like it had never touched a hanger that wasn't padded. She was tall, with box braids pulled into a high, sleek bun, gold hoops, and the kind of confidence that filled a room before she even opened her mouth. Cecilia, right? I'm Gabriella Cross. Everybody calls me Gabby. She extended a manicured hand. Terrence said you're our new secret weapon. I don't know about secret weapons, Cecilia said, shaking her hand. But I'm happy to be here. Come on, let me show you the account room. We've got a presentation due in 2 weeks for one of our biggest clients, and I could use a fresh set of eyes. Gabriella's office was at the end of the hall, bigger than most, with a glass wall that let in the morning light. It was decorated the way someone decorates when they want people to know exactly who they are. A framed magazine feature on the wall, a shelf of award statues, a row of family photos in matching frames along the windowsill. Cecilia walked in behind her, eyes drifting over the space the way you do in a new coworker's office, polite and curious, and not really looking for anything. And then she saw it. The frame was small, silver, slightly tilted, sitting just to the left of Gabriella's monitor. In it, a man stood on a beach at golden hour, sunburned across the nose the way Israel always got, because he refused to wear sunscreen no matter how many times Cecilia bought it for him. He wore a faded gray t-shirt Cecilia had bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, the one with the small tear near the collar that she kept saying she'd sew and never did. His arm was around a woman's waist. The woman's face was angled away from the camera, toward him, laughing at something. Cecilia's whole body went very still and very cold at the same time. That's a beautiful photo, she heard herself say, and her voice came out completely normal, completely pleasant. The voice of a woman admiring a coworker's vacation pictures and nothing more. Where was that taken? Gabriella glanced over, and something flickered across her face. Not guilt, not yet. Just the brief pleasure of being asked about something she was proud of. Cancun, last spring. One of the best trips of my life, honestly. She turned back to her computer. Anyway, let me pull up the Brightline deck so you can. Cancun, Cecilia repeated. Nice. She did not ask another question. She did not let her eyes drift back to the frame even though every part of her wanted to. She sat down at the small round table in Gabriella's office, opened her laptop, and spent the next 2 hours discussing campaign strategy with the woman whose desk held a picture of Cecilia's husband with his arm around her waist on a trip Israel had told Cecilia was a guys' weekend in Miami that he couldn't get out of for their anniversary. By the time Cecilia made it back to her own office and closed the door, her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against the desk. To stop, she did not cry. She had wanted to, in the elevator, in the bathroom, anywhere with a lock on the door, but she didn't let herself. Instead, she sat very still, breathing slowly, and made a decision that would define the next several months of her life. She was not going to say a word, not yet. That evening, Cecilia came home to find Israel in the kitchen, already pulling takeout containers out of a bag, humming along to something playing low on the speaker. There she is, he said, grinning. How was day one? They did, Cecilia said, setting her bag down by the door, keeping her voice light, keeping her face soft. It was a good day. That's my girl. He crossed the kitchen and kissed her temple, and Cecilia let him, even as every nerve in her body screamed at her to step back. What kind of accounts are you working on? Oh, a little bit of everything. Some retail, some hospitality. She opened a cabinet and pulled down 2 plates, her back to him. What about you? Anything new with the business? Same old. Permits, subs, the usual headache. He sat down at the island and started scrolling his phone again the way he always did. Oh, hey, remember that trip I took to Miami last spring? For the contractors thing? Guy I met there is trying to get me to invest in some property deal. I might fly back down to look at it. Cecilia turned around slowly, plate in hand, and looked at her husband's face. He wasn't even nervous. He said it the same way he'd say he was thinking about getting a haircut. Miami, she said. Right, that trip. Yeah, why? No reason. Cecilia said, and set the plate down in front of him gently, the way you set something down when you're afraid that if you put it down too hard, you might break it, or maybe yourself. Just didn't realize you were still in touch with people from that. Small world, Israel said, already looking back at his phone. That night, after Israel had fallen asleep, Cecilia lay awake in the dark with her own phone held low, the brightness turned all the way down. She pulled up old photos, anniversary trips, birthday dinners, the gray t-shirt with the tear near the collar that she remembered buying at a little shop in Savannah. She scrolled until she found a photo from the week Israel had supposedly been in Miami. In it, he'd sent her a selfie from what he claimed was a hotel balcony, the ocean behind him, the caption reading, "Missing you, wish you were here." Cecilia zoomed in on the railing behind him in that selfie. Then she zoomed in her memory, on the railing behind him in the photo on Gabriella Cross's desk. They were the same railing. She set the phone down on the nightstand, face down, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Somewhere in the apartment, the refrigerator hummed. Israel's breathing beside her was slow and even, the breathing of a man who had no idea that anything in his life was about to change. Cecilia thought about the silver frame, about the way Gabriella had said, one of the best trips of my life, honestly, with that little private smile, the smile of someone who thought no one else would ever know what that trip really was. She thought about her new corner office, with the door that closed. She thought about the fact that, as of 10 o'clock that morning, she now had a front row seat to Israel's affair, and Israel didn't know it. Gabriella didn't know it. Nobody in that glass building on Peachtree Street knew that the quiet new account director with the warm smile and the steady hands had just walked, completely by accident, directly into the middle of the wreckage her husband had been building behind her back for who knew how long. Cecilia closed her eyes. Whatever this was, however deep it went, she was going to find out every single detail of it before anyone found out that she knew. She had spent 6 years building a career from a kitchen table, while believing her marriage was the one solid thing underneath all of it. If that foundation was cracked, she needed to know exactly how deep the cracks ran, and exactly who had put them there, before she decided what to do about any of it. For now, she was going to do something Israel had clearly never expected from her in his life. She was going to keep her cool, and she was going to ask questions, just not the kind anyone would notice. 2 days later, Cecilia sat across from Gabriella in the same glass-walled office, going over the timeline for the bank's builder's presentation. The silver frame was still there, slightly tilted, and Cecilia had trained her eyes to slide right past it without pausing, the way you train yourself not to look at the sun. "So this campaign is for bank's builders specifically?" Cecilia asked, keeping her tone professional, curious in the way any new account director would be curious. "How long have they been a client?" "About a year," Gabriella said, scrolling through a deck on her monitor. "They're actually one of my favorite accounts. The owner, Israel Banks, he's incredible to work with. Visionary, you know? He's the kind of client who actually listens when you pitch him something, doesn't just nod and go do whatever he was already planning to do." "Sounds like a good guy," Cecilia said. "He's the best," Gabriella said. And there was something underneath the word best, something soft and private that she didn't seem to realize was showing on her face. Then she cleared her throat, sat up a little straighter, and clicked to the next slide. "Anyway, he's actually coming in for a check-in meeting in a couple of weeks, before the big presentation. You'll get to meet him. I think you two will get along. You've got that same kind of grounded energy." "I look forward to it," Cecilia said, and wrote something down in her notebook so she wouldn't have to keep her face still for one more second. What she wrote was a date, the date of the check-in meeting. Underneath it, she wrote 3 words, "Be there first." Because if Israel Banks was about to walk into this building and sit down across from his wife, and the woman whose desk held his vacation photo, Cecilia intended to be the one controlling exactly how that moment happened, not him and not Gabriella Cross. She closed her notebook, smiled, and asked Gabriella to walk her through the budget numbers next. 8 months before Cecilia Banks ever walked into Solstice Media Group, Gabriella Cross was standing in a hotel ballroom in Buckhead, holding a glass of champagne she didn't really want, watching a man across the room laugh at something one of his business partners said. She'd noticed him the moment he walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that fit like it had been made for him, because it had been. Gabriella had done her research before the gal even started. She always did. Israel Banks, owner of Banks Construction Group, one of the fastest-growing development firms in the Atlanta metro area, and, according to the brief Solstice had put together for the event, a man Solstice wanted very badly as a client. What the brief hadn't mentioned was that Israel Banks was married. Gabriella found that out 3 weeks later, scrolling through his social media at 2 in the morning, and by then it didn't seem to matter the way it probably should have. "You're Gabriella, right, from Solstice?" Israel had said that night, walking over with the easy confidence of a man who knew people generally wanted him to walk over. "Terrence introduced us earlier, but it was loud. I didn't catch much." "Gabby," she'd said, shaking his hand, holding it maybe a half-second longer than a handshake required. "And yes, I actually put together part of the proposal your team is reviewing next week. No kidding." Israel had tilted his head, studying her with new interest. "The one about the rebrand for the Riverside development? That's me. That deck was sharp, really sharp. He'd smiled, and Gabriella had felt it land somewhere low in her chest. I told my team whoever wrote this gets it. Most agencies pitch us generic stuff. This one actually felt like somebody walked our job sites first. I did walk your job sites, Gabriella said. Twice. I like to know what I'm selling. I respect that, Israel had said. And for the rest of that gala, even when other people pulled him into other conversations, his eyes kept finding their way back across the room to her. It started small, the way these things always start small. A follow-up call about the proposal that ran 20 minutes longer than it needed to. A coffee meeting that turned into lunch because they lost track of time. Texts that began as logistics. What time should we schedule the next review? And slowly, over weeks, became something else. Good morning. Hope your day's not too crazy. Saw this and thought of you. Israel Banks signed with Solstice as a client within a month of that gala, and within 3 months, Gabriella Cross was the lead on his account, a fact that several of her coworkers grumbled about quietly, since she'd only been at Solstice a year and a half. You're spending a lot of time on the bank's account, one of those coworkers, a woman who worked 2 desks down, had said one Friday afternoon, not unkindly, just observing late calls, weekend emails. He's just one client. He's our biggest client, Gabriella had said, not looking up from her screen. And he's particular. He likes things done a certain way. The coworker had said and gone back to her own work, but Gabriella had felt the weight of that single sound land on her like a held breath. By the time the affair became physical, a hotel in Midtown 6 months before Cecilia's first day, after a dinner that was supposed to be just business, Gabriella had already convinced herself of a story. The story went like this. Israel's marriage was already over in every way that counted. He'd told her his wife worked from home, didn't really understand his world, didn't get what it took to build something the way he'd built his company. He'd told her things had been complicated for years. He'd told her, lying in that hotel room with his shirt still half-buttoned, that he didn't know what he was doing anymore, that he felt like he'd been sleepwalking through his own life until he met her. Gabriella believed him, or she believed enough of it to keep going. You ever think about it? She'd asked him one night, 3 months before Cecilia's first day, the two of them sitting on the balcony of that same hotel, the city lights spread out below them. Leaving. Israel had been quiet for a moment, swirling the ice in his glass. It's complicated. You always say that. Because it's always true, Gabby. He'd set the glass down and turned to face her. I've got the business tied up with hers. Well, not with her business, but financially, the house, accounts, all of it. If I just walk, I lose half of everything I've spent 15 years building. You think I want that? So what? You're just going to stay with her forever? Sneak around forever? I'm not staying with her forever. He'd reached over and taken her hand. I'm telling you, when the time is right, when things are positioned the way they need to be, I'll handle it. I just need you to be patient with me. Can you do that? I've been patient, Gabriella had said, but she'd let him pull her closer anyway, because the alternative was walking away from a man who made her feel like the most important person in any room, and Gabriella Cross had spent her whole career clawing her way into rooms where she had to fight to be noticed. She wasn't ready to walk away from the first person who made her feel like she didn't have to fight at all. What Gabriella did not know, what Israel had very carefully never mentioned, was that there was no prenuptial weakness to exploit, no shaky financial entanglement that made leaving Cecilia complicated. The truth was almost the opposite. Years earlier, after an emotional affair Israel had with a woman from his gym that Cecilia had found out about, and after months of counseling, chosen to forgive, the two of them had renegotiated their prenuptial agreement as part of rebuilding trust. The new agreement included a clause. Cecilia's lawyer had insisted on it, and Israel, eager to prove he'd changed, had signed it without much of a fight, stating that in the event of a second instance of infidelity, Cecilia would be entitled to a significantly larger share of the marital assets, including a stake in Banks' construction group itself. Israel had signed that agreement 4 years ago, certain he would never need to think about it again. He had been wrong. A week after Cecilia's first day, she sat across from her sister Octavia, an older sister, not the coworker who happened to share a name, at a small table in a coffee shop in East Atlanta, turning a paper cup slowly between her hands. You haven't said 2 words since you sat down, Octavia said, watching her. What's going on? I found something, Cecilia said. At work. What kind of something? Cecilia told her. All of it? The frame, the gray t-shirt, the railing in the photo matching the railing in Israel's Miami selfie. The way Gabriella had said, one of the best trips of my life, with that soft, private little smile. Octavia listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening more and more as Cecilia talked, until by the end she had both hands flat on the table like she needed something to hold on to. Cecilia. Octavia's voice was low and careful. You need to confront him, tonight. You don't owe that man one more day of pretending everything's fine. I know. So why haven't you? Cecilia looked down at her coffee. Because if I confront him right now, what happens? He denies it or he admits it and cries and says it's over, and either way, I'm left with nothing but his word. He'll go to her, tell her to be careful, tell her maybe they should cool things off for a while. She'll get scared and back off for a few months, and then in a year I'll find out it never stopped, and I'll have given him time to clean everything up first. I'll have given him a head start. So what? You're just going to keep working in that building, watching this play out? For now, Cecilia said. I have a meeting with Israel at my job, in front of his mistress, in 2 weeks. He doesn't know I know. She doesn't know I know. I want to see how he acts in that room, Octavia. I want to see exactly how good he is at this, because I think it's been going on a lot longer than I want to believe, and I want to know everything before I decide what I'm doing about any of it. Octavia studied her sister for a long moment, then sat back in her chair. You scare me a little sometimes, you know that? I learned it from you, Cecilia said, and for the first time in days, she almost smiled. The check-in meeting happened on a Thursday morning in the largest conference room at Solstice, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Peachtree Street. Cecilia arrived early. She'd told Gabriella she wanted to review the deck one more time, which was true, but it was also true that she wanted to be already seated, already calm, already in possession of herself, before Israel walked through that door. He came in at 9:58, 2 minutes early, wearing a navy suit Cecilia had picked out for him at a store in Lenox Square 18 months ago. He was laughing at something one of his project managers said behind him, and then he stepped fully into the room, and his eyes landed on his wife sitting at the conference table with a notepad and a Solstice lanyard around her neck. For 1/2 of 1 second, Israel Banks's entire face went slack. Cecilia, he said, and his voice cracked just slightly on the second syllable. What? You're Cecilia Banks, Gabriella said brightly, walking in behind him, completely unaware, gesturing toward Cecilia like she was presenting a gift. Our newest senior account director, and honestly, already one of the sharpest minds on this team. Cecilia, this is Israel Banks, the client I was telling you about. We've actually met, Israel said, too quickly, and then catching himself added, small world, right? Cecilia's my wife. The room went very still. Terrence Whitfield, sitting at the head of the table, raised his eyebrows in pleasant surprise. Wait, your wife works here now? Cecilia, you didn't mention that. I just started, Cecilia said smoothly, looking directly at Israel with the same warm, steady expression she'd worn for 2 weeks. I figured I'd let it come up naturally. Small world is right. Gabriella's expression did something complicated. Surprise, then a quick recalibration, then a smile that was a half second too wide. Well, that's wonderful. That's wow. Small world doesn't even cover it. Doesn't it though, Cecilia said, and reached for her water glass and took a slow sip, and did not look away from Gabriella Cross's face for one single moment, watching every flicker that crossed it. The meeting itself went smoothly enough on the surface. Numbers, timelines, campaign strategy. But Cecilia spent the entire hour doing 2 things once. On the surface, she contributed thoughtfully, asked sharp questions, impressed Terrence with her grasp of the construction industry's marketing landscape. Underneath, she watched. She watched the way Israel's eyes drifted toward Gabriella whenever he thought no one was looking. She watched the way Gabriella's pen tapped faster against her notepad whenever Israel spoke. She watched the careful, practiced distance between them, the kind of distance 2 people only maintain when they've had a lot of practice not standing too close. After the meeting, in the hallway, Cecilia caught Israel's arm gently before he could leave. We should grab dinner tonight, she said, smiling. Celebrate the new job a little. You can tell me all about working with my team. Yeah, Israel said, and there was something in his eyes, not quite fear but close to it, that Cecilia filed away carefully. Yeah, of course, baby. Dinner sounds great. That night, over dinner at a restaurant Israel chose because it was quiet and dim and far from anyone they knew, he talked more than he had in months. He asked about her day, complimented the office, told her Terrence seemed impressed with her. He was warm, attentive, present in a way he hadn't been in a long time, and Cecilia understood exactly what was happening. He was scared. He was performing. He had spent the entire afternoon, she imagined, running through every conversation he and Gabriella had ever had in front of Cecilia, every text he might have left visible, every alibi he'd given that could now collapse under the weight of two women in the same building. "You seem stressed," Cecilia said gently, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Everything okay with the business?" "Just a lot going on," Israel said. "Big projects right now, lots of moving pieces." "Well," Cecilia said, squeezing his hand, "I'm here, whatever you need." She meant it as a promise. He took it as comfort. Those were not the same thing, and only one of them in that restaurant understood the difference. 2 weeks later, Gabriella Cross got the call she'd been hoping for since the day she signed Israel Banks as a client. Terrence called her into his office on a Monday morning, and when she walked out 20 minutes later, she was practically floating. Banks Construction Group had decided to triple their marketing budget for the next fiscal year, and they'd specifically requested that Gabriella be promoted to Senior Vice President of Client Strategy, overseeing not just their account but a small portfolio of major clients beneath her. "This is huge for you," Terrence had told her. Israel Banks specifically advocated for this, said, "You were the reason his company finally felt like it had a marketing partner that understood them." Gabriella had thanked him, kept her composure until she got back to her office, and then closed the door and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of pure, silent triumph, both fists clenched at her sides. Israel had done this for her. Quietly, behind the scenes, he'd pushed for this, the way he'd promised he would start doing, positioning things, he'd called it. Positioning things so that when the time came, she wouldn't just be some woman he'd had an affair with. She'd be someone with standing, someone with her own power, someone Israel's world would have to take seriously. That night, she texted him, "Heard the news. Thank you. I know what this means." His reply came 20 minutes later. "You earned it. Things are about to get easier for us, Gabby. I promise." Gabriella read that message 4 times before she went to sleep, smiling in the dark, completely certain that the hardest part was behind her. She had no idea that 2 floors below her own office, Cecilia Banks had spent that same evening sitting at her kitchen table with a folder of printed bank statements, a notebook full of dates, and a business card for a family law attorney that Octavia had given her 3 days earlier. A card Cecilia had not yet called, but had also not put away. She had no idea that the promotion she was celebrating had just placed her, on paper and in practice, directly under the supervision of the marketing department's senior leadership. Leadership that, within a matter of months, Cecilia herself was being quietly groomed to join. And she had absolutely no idea that the prenuptial agreement Israel Banks had signed 4 years earlier contained a single clause that was about to turn her promotion into the loudest, most public unraveling of her career. Gabriella Cross went to sleep that night believing she had won. She had no idea the clock had already started. 5 years before any of this, Cecilia Banks sat in a marriage counselor's office in a building off Roswell Road, holding a tissue she hadn't used yet, listening to her husband admit to something he swore had never gone physical. A trainer at his gym, months of texting, late workouts that ran long, a birthday gift he'd bought for the trainer, and hidden in his truck, a gift Cecilia had found by accident while looking for a phone charger. Israel had cried in that office. He'd said he didn't know what was wrong with him, that he loved his wife, that he'd let his ego get the better of him because someone new was paying attention to him in a way that felt good, and he was sorry, and he would do anything to fix it. Cecilia had believed him. Not blindly, she wasn't naive even then, but she believed that people could make one terrible mistake and still be worth staying for, especially after 8 years of marriage, especially when he was willing to do the work. They went to counseling for 9 months. Israel changed his number, switched gyms, came home on time, called when he said he would. And at the end of those 9 months, at Cecilia's request, and with the full support of their counselor, the two of them sat down with lawyers and rewrote their prenuptial agreement. "I want this in here," Cecilia had told the attorney, sliding a piece of paper across the table with a single paragraph typed on it, a paragraph she had written and rewritten a dozen times the night before. "Not because I think it's going to happen again, but because if it ever does, I don't want to be the one who has to prove anything, or beg for anything, or fight for years in court while he hides money. I want it to already be decided. I want it to be the kind of thing that makes him think twice." Israel had read the clause. He'd looked up at Cecilia across the table, and there had been real shame on his face, and he'd said, "I deserve this. I'm not going to need it, but I deserve it." And he'd signed it. The clause stated, in plain language any judge could read in under a minute, that should clear and documented evidence of a subsequent extramarital affair arise during the marriage. Cecilia Banks would be entitled to 40% ownership of Banks Construction Group as it existed at the time of the affair's discovery, in addition to standard equitable distribution of all other marital assets. 40% of a company that 5 years later was worth just under $11 million. Israel had signed it because, at the time, he had truly believed he would never need to think about that paragraph again. He had been wrong twice now, once about the affair and once about Cecilia. In the months following the check-in meeting, Cecilia did not confront anyone. She did her job, well, by every account. Terrence had already pulled her into a conversation about a leadership track within the department, and she watched. She started noticing things she had been too hurt, too stunned to notice clearly before. The way Israel's late-site visits always seemed to happen on days Gabriella had blocked her calendar for external meetings. The hotel charge on a business card statement, a hotel 6 minutes from Solstice's office, on a Tuesday when Israel had told Cecilia he was in Macon. A long blonde, no, a long box braid, caught and tangled in the strap of Israel's gym bag. The kind of detail that would have meant nothing to her 2 months earlier and now meant everything. She didn't dig through his phone. She didn't follow him. She didn't need to. She had something better: time, patience, and a job that put her one floor away from the affair itself. She finally called the attorney on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in her car in the Solstice parking garage during her lunch break. "I want to start the process," Cecilia told her, quietly. "I don't want him to know anything is happening until it's already happening." "Based on what you've described," the attorney said, "and assuming we can establish the timeline and the connection to your existing agreement, this is going to move fast once it starts. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Cecilia looked out through the windshield at the parking garage's concrete pillars, gray and steady, and thought about a silver picture frame, and a gray t-shirt with a torn collar, and a man crying in a counselor's office 5 years ago, promising he had learned something. "I've been ready since the day I walked in here," Cecilia said. "I just needed to make sure I had everything first. The Banks Construction Group annual renewal presentation, the deal that would lock in their tripled marketing budget for the next 3 years, and cement Gabriella Cross's new role as the golden child of the department, was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in the largest conference room, Solstice, the same room where Israel and Cecilia had first sat across from each other as client and account director. Terrence had invited the entire senior leadership team. Champagne was chilling in a small fridge in the corner of the room, ready for after the contracts were signed. Cecilia had asked to be added to the presentation team 2 weeks earlier, citing her construction industry background. Terrence had agreed enthusiastically. Gabriella had agreed too, a little less enthusiastically, though she'd covered it well. The presentation began smoothly. Gabriella walked the room through the new campaign strategy, the budget breakdown, the projected reach. Israel sat near the head of the table, nodding along, glancing occasionally, carefully, briefly, toward Gabriella with the kind of pride a client has in an agency that's done good work for him, or at least that's how it would have looked to anyone who didn't already know better. When Gabriella reached the final slide, a simple page that read Banks Construction Group X Solstice, building the next 3 years together, she smiled around the room and said, "I think this partnership speaks for itself. I'm incredibly proud of what we've built here, and I think the next 3 years are going to be even bigger." "They might be," Cecilia said, standing up from her seat at the far end of the table. "But I'm afraid I have to pause this meeting for a moment, because there's something everyone in this room needs to know before any contracts get signed today." The room went quiet. Terrence, 2 seats down, frowned slightly. "Cecilia, is everything all right?" "It will be," Cecilia said, and her voice was steady, calm, the same warm tone she'd used every single day for the last 4 months. "Terrence, you've built Solstice's reputation on trust. Clients trust us to represent their brand honestly, and employees trust the leadership to run a workplace with integrity. I think everyone deserves to know that for the last several months, the lead account executive on this account has been involved in a personal relationship with the client, a relationship that, frankly, raises serious questions about how this tripled budget and this promotion came to be." "What, Cecilia, what are you talking about?" Gabriella's voice came out sharp, defensive, her eyes flicking toward Israel and then quickly away. "That's completely inappropriate. That's not." "It's true though, isn't it, Gabby?" Cecilia said, and she said it gently, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. "Cancun, last spring, The hotel 6 minutes from this building. The gray t-shirt with the small tear near the collar. Cecilia looked at Israel for the first time since the meeting began, and her husband's face had gone the color of old paper. "That's my husband's shirt, Gabby. I bought it for him. I recognized it the first day I walked into your office and saw it sitting in a frame on your desk." The silence in the room had a texture to it, thick and electric. Terrence's mouth opened slightly, then closed. "Cecilia," Israel started, half rising from his chair, his voice cracking. "This isn't... Let's not do this here. Let's talk about this at home. This isn't the place." "You're right," Cecilia said, turning to him, and for the first time, there was something underneath her calm. Not anger exactly, something colder and more final. "This isn't the place to talk about it. Because we're not going to talk about it, Israel. There's nothing left to talk about. I filed for divorce 3 days ago. You'll be getting served at your office on Monday, so you might want to clear your schedule." "You filed." Israel's voice was barely above a whisper. "Cecilia, you can't just..." "I can," Cecilia said. "And I did. And you signed something 5 years ago that means this isn't going to be a long process, Israel. 40% of Bank's construction group as it's valued today. $11 million, give or take. You signed that. You said you deserved it. You said you wouldn't need to think about it again." She looked around the table, at Terrence, at the rest of the leadership team, at the project managers who had come along for what was supposed to be a celebratory meeting. "I'm sorry to everyone else in this room. I know this isn't how any of you expected this afternoon to go. But I think you'd all want to know exactly what's been driving this account's decisions for the last several months before you sign a 3-year contract based on it. This is Terrence. This is a personal matter. This has nothing to do with the agency's work," Gabriella said, her composure cracking at the edges now, her voice rising. "The campaigns I've built for this account stand on their own. The results speak for themselves. You can't let some marital dispute." "Gabriella." Terrence's voice, when it came, was quiet, and quiet from Terrence Whitfield was worse than shouting. "Did you have a personal relationship with a client while managing his account?" The room waited. Gabriella's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes went to Israel, looking for something, help, maybe, or just permission to keep lying. And Israel, staring down at the table, said nothing at all. He didn't defend her. He didn't deny it. He just sat there, silent. And in that silence, Gabriella understood, with a clarity that hit her like cold water, that the man who had told her things are about to get easier for us had absolutely no intention of standing next to her for what was about to happen. "It's a yes or no question, Gabriella," Terrence said. "Yes," Gabriella said, so quietly it was almost lost in the hum of the air conditioning. "I'm going to need you to gather your things and leave the building," Terrence said. "We'll discuss the details of your separation with HR. This conversation about the contract is over. Bank's construction group will be in touch through different channels going forward. And I think, given everything I just heard, we'll need some time to review whether this partnership continues at all." Israel stood up so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He looked at Gabriella, really looked at her, for the first time since Cecilia started talking. And Gabriella looked back at him with an expression that was no longer soft, no longer private, no longer anything close to the way she'd looked in that frame on a beach in Cancun. "Say something," Gabriella said to him, her voice shaking. "Israel, say something." Israel didn't say anything. He grabbed his suit jacket off the back of his chair and walked out of the conference room, without looking at anyone, and the door swung shut behind him with a soft final click that somehow felt louder than if he'd slammed it. Gabriella stood there for a moment, alone, in front of a room full of people who had 2 minutes earlier been about to applaud her. Then she gathered her laptop and her notes with hands that weren't quite steady, and walked out a different door, and nobody in that room ever saw her again. Cecilia sat back down. Terrence cleared his throat, glanced at the rest of the team, and said gently, "Cecilia, why don't we take a short break?" "I'd appreciate that," Cecilia said. "Thank you, Terrence." She walked to the window at the far end of the room and looked out over Peachtree Street, at the cars moving below, at the ordinary Friday afternoon continuing on as though nothing had just happened 30 feet above it. Her hands, for the first time in 4 months, were not steady. She let them shake. There was no one left in the room to perform for. 6 weeks later, the divorce was finalized faster than Cecilia's attorney had even predicted. Israel's own lawyers, once they saw the prenuptial clause in the documentation Cecilia had compiled, advised him not to fight it, and he didn't. Bank's construction group restructured to absorb the ownership transfer, and Cecilia became, on paper, a 40% owner of a company she had no interest in running, which she sold her stake of within the year to one of Israel's longtime business partners for a sum that made her attorney whistle softly when she told her the number. Banks Construction Group lost the Solstice contract entirely. Terrence, it turned out, did not love the idea of representing a client whose business decisions had been quietly steered by an affair with one of his employees, and within a few months word had spread enough through Atlanta's business community that Israel's company lost 2 other contracts as well. Not because anyone announced what had happened, but because in a city where everybody seemed to know somebody who worked at Solstice, stories like that one didn't stay quiet for long. Cecilia, on the other hand, was promoted that spring to Director of Client Strategy, the role Gabriella had been so close to expanding into, and within a year, she'd used part of her settlement to buy a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood near Decatur, the kind of place with a small garden out back that she filled with tomato plants she had no idea how to take care of and learned anyway. Slowly, the way she seemed to learn everything now. Patiently, on her own terms, with nobody watching over her shoulder. She didn't boast about any of it. When coworkers asked carefully how she was doing, she'd say she was doing well, and mean it, and change the subject. She didn't need anyone to know what it had cost her to sit in that conference room 4 months earlier and keep her voice steady while she dismantled her own marriage in front of a room full of strangers. She knew that was enough. On a Friday evening about a year after that meeting, Cecilia stood in her new kitchen, music playing low, chopping vegetables for dinner, alone and entirely at peace with it. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Octavia, just a string of heart emojis and the words "proud of you, sis," no context needed, because Octavia knew exactly what day it was. The day a year ago that Cecilia had walked into a glass office building for the first time, seen a photograph she was never supposed to see, and decided in the space of about 4 seconds exactly who she was going to be for the next several months. Cecilia smiled at her phone, set it back down, and went back to chopping vegetables, humming quietly along with the music in a kitchen that was entirely, finally, only hers. The hardest part of this story isn't the affair. Affairs happen, and as painful as they are, they're rarely the whole story. They're usually a symptom of something that was already broken, or a choice someone made because they thought no one would ever find out. The hardest part of this story is the 4 months Cecilia spent saying nothing, smiling at a woman who was sleeping with her husband, sitting across from her at a conference table, learning everything about her before that woman ever got the chance to learn anything about her. That kind of composure isn't coldness, it's strategy, and it's also armor. Cecilia didn't stay quiet because she didn't feel anything. She stayed quiet because she understood something a lot of people learn the hard way. The moment you reveal what you know, you lose the ability to learn anything more. Confrontation feels good in the moment. It feels like power. But real power, the kind that actually changes the outcome of a situation, often looks like patience. It looks like writing down dates instead of throwing plates. It looks like calling a lawyer before you call your husband a liar to his face. There's also a lesson here about paperwork, about the unglamorous, unromantic conversations people have years before anything goes wrong, the prenuptial agreements and the clauses nobody wants to think about on their wedding day. Cecilia didn't write that clause because she expected to need it. She wrote it because she understood that protecting yourself isn't the same as expecting the worst. It's just refusing to be powerless if the worst happens. Israel signed that agreement believing he'd changed. Maybe he even had for a while. But the agreement wasn't really about him. It was about making sure that if he hadn't changed, Cecilia would never have to beg for what was already hers. And then there's Gabriella, the part of this story that's easiest to judge and hardest to really sit with. She wasn't a monster. She was someone who wanted to be chosen, who mistook being someone's secret for being someone's priority, and who built an entire version of her future on promises made by a man who, when the moment actually came, couldn't even look at her. That's the part worth remembering. Anyone willing to lie for you is also, eventually, someone capable of leaving you to face the consequences alone. In the end, the people who lost everything in this story were the two who spent months being careless, certain, and quiet in all the wrong ways. And the person who came out on top was the one who was quiet on purpose, who kept her composure not because she didn't care, but because she cared enough to make sure that when the truth finally came out, it came out exactly the way she needed it to, in front of exactly the people who needed to hear it, at exactly the moment that mattered most.